Hello again, viewers, and welcome back to the channel. We're getting out of the workshop, and today I'm currently standing at Rayard, one of the locations along the former Pittsburg and Shawmut line. Rayard would have been located at what would have been milepost 22 along the Shawmut. Looking in this direction, we're looking north towards Brookville, and I'm currently standing next to the old scale. You can see that right here, and then there's the scale house. And then looking this direction is going south towards what would have been Norman at milepost 24. And that would have led off to the Conifer branch. But basically, going to be walking around here, looking at, well, what remains of Rayard, considering a lot of it's grown up, and at least from my records, there hasn't been any activity here since at least 2014. I'll talk about that a bit here later on. But probably the first thing to look at is the old scale. So as is probably evident from what you're seeing right now, years of neglect have not done this scale any good. You can see that the wood is deteriorating, and in fact there's chunks of it laying all over here. But in addition to that, the scale pit itself is also filled up with water, and the scale track is very much overgrown, numerous bushes and undergrowth. There's even some small trees in places. And I know for a fact that this scale track was still in use back in 2014. Just a short distance down the line there would have been some empty hoppers sitting. And I know that Brookville Equipment was actually using Rayard to test their locomotives. I'm not sure up to what point, but basically when this yard was still in operation, when the Shawmut was still using it, you had the scale track here, you had a siding here, and then that was the main stretch of line right there. But at least as far as I know, Brookville Equipment has not used this for testing purposes for quite a while now. In fact, they don't go any further than the Brookville Viaduct. So I couldn't tell you when the last time was this yard has seen any activity. So because I'm not going to step anywhere on this dilapidating scale, I'm going to come over this way where we got solid ground. And we're going to walk over into the scale house here. I know you can actually get into this. When I was here last year, I was not able to get through because of these hornet's nests were actually active, but of course there's no activity now. And basically, there's not a whole lot in here. You got obviously the equipment that they would use to weigh the cars. There's a pit right there I do not want to step down into. So something I'm finding a little curious with the scale house here is the windows. You'll see that's probably one of the original windows here. Of course the glass is going in it. There's another one which has been broken. But you got these two here which are missing entirely. And you got this one which was replaced and actually still has glass in it, which I'm kind of surprised nobody's, busted that out of there. So, I'm curious what the story is with that. But there's another look at the scale equipment. And I notice if I walk over here, apparently that's the manufacturer. And this scale is set up max capacity 200 tons. There's some more, whatever with this. But over in this area, you can see there's a pipe coming out of the ceiling. There probably would have been a wood stove or something in here for heating during the winter months. And I noticed there had to have been something on the wall here, because this section of cement block is not painted. And over here, there is some information scribbled on here. Pump 1-15.96 it looks like, and there's some dates on here. Scale tested by Conrail 9/7/77. There's another one for 8/12/92. There's another look down in that pit in the floor. I'm noticing some ladder rungs right there. I have no idea how deep that is, but something tells me I don't want to know. So that being the case, I think I'm just going to turn around and walk out of here now. So there's one more look at the scale and the scale house. And I think now I'm going to go ahead and walk up to the northern end of Rayard. Not a whole lot to see up there, but there is a couple things that I want to show in this video. So this is about 50 feet north of the scale. You can see there's a switch here, and basically this is set to run alongside the scale. If the switch was thrown the other way, you'd go right up on the scale. So basically, if they weren't weighing cars, they had a method to bypass the scale on this track. So walking north here, like I said, you can see how overgrown the scale track is. And again, considering this was still being used in 2014, and we're just a little over 10 years later, it's hard to believe it's grown up that much. But I think the track which would have been used most recently would have been the main stretch right here, because like I said, Brookville Equipment was still testing their locomotives and running them out this way. Unfortunately, that's just, something they don't do anymore. Mrs. Plowbender is collecting spikes.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
So this is looking north. The scale's just right up there in the middle of the screen. I noticed this area in Rayard, the track's definitely not in the best of condition. Looks like there's been some washes here that have actually washed all the ballast right out from underneath them. You can see there's nothing under that rail there. And I notice the main track here, if you look along this side, there's like hardly any ballast there. And I mean, granted, who knows when the last time anything was done with this, but I definitely say if a train went over that, you'd probably be looking at a derailment. So continuing on the walk up north, and again, you can just see how overgrown the scale track is. In fact, even the middle track's got quite a bit of brush. There's some brake shoes, which probably would have been off some of the cars which were sitting here. Might be amazed at some of the treasures you could find just laying around out here. But yeah, like I said, you compare the main track here to the siding and the scale track, and I think, like I said, this track probably was the last one to be in use. These other two, not so much. I noticed down from the road here looks to be a retaining wall made of old railroad ties. Whether or not that served another purpose, I don't really know. But still walking north here. There's one of the, I think those are called chairs that hold the rails in place, randomly laying on the track there. Keep finding chunks of brake shoes. Probably off of the old cars they had here that were being scrapped. There's another piece of rail just randomly laying. Also noticing, you look at the scale track there, seeing more washed out places and ties deteriorating. Now coming up here, there's another brake shoe again. Looks to be randomly placed, but they might have fell off of the cars when they were moving them around. More chunks of brake shoes right here along the scale track. Also notice some other miscellaneous garbage just laying. There's a Charlie Brown Christmas tree. More bushes. But ought to be getting close. Up here at the north end of Rayard, there's an old phone booth sitting. So here's something interesting. On the main track, I noticed there's chunks of bolt laying here. And upon closer inspection, it's supposed to be right in there. In fact, right there is the second bolt that's missing out of that. So there's basically nothing holding that rail in there other than friction. Yep, it's pretty clear Rayard's got quite a few issues in terms of maintenance or lack thereof, but what do you expect? So we've just about reached the northern end of Rayard. You can see where the scale track goes into a switch into the siding track. Then further up there, there's another switch where the siding track joins up with the main track here. There's the phone booth, and I'm thinking that what looks like a pallet would have been the floor that sat in there. Of course, somebody's taken it out. Looks like it's filled up with a bunch of other garbage. Little wall-mounted desk area here, and I think that's where the phone would have been. It's not there now, but we got M2D, whatever any of that's supposed to mean. I noticed there's some graffiti on the wall. I don't really need to point everything out. You can basically see what's all here. I don't know how well that's coming up, but yeah, there's really not much left in here at this time. Door's still there, but somebody's apparently used it for target practice based on all the bullet holes. And I'm thinking it was possibly late 50s, 60s, the Shawmut started using radios. And of course the telephone booths were obsolete by that point. Down from the phone booth, there's a switch stand here, and that's set to go on to the siding track. And then just down from this, I've talked about this with a few people online, and we've determined that this is actually a D-rail here. And at one time there would have been another switch with a track leading off over this way. That would have been a runaway track, basically to keep runaway cars from the scale up there coming down onto the main. And there was a photo I saw of that from, I think, the 50s or 60s, and it basically showed that track that runs off to the side here. Apparently it was removed, I think, sometime in the 70s, if I'm correct. So this is it, the north end of Rayard. Here's the switch, and I noticed, I was looking at the switch stand here, this is actually locked, has a Buffalo and Pittsburgh lock on it. And something interesting I noticed about this lock has actually been smashed, because I got a picture of this I took last year. I'll actually flash that photo up now, and you can see the cover was still on it. But this one here, it's dinged and bent, and so I don't know what somebody's deal was trying to get this off of here. But yeah. If I were to continue walking down the tracks that way, I'd eventually come to the Brookville Viaduct. However, I'm not going to walk that far, and instead I think I'm going to start heading back south towards the scale. Walking back here, I have to say it's quite a hike, and I'm not sure what the total distance is of Rayard, but if I can find that out, I'll go ahead and leave it on this video. Alright, so after a bit of walking, back up here at the scale again. And from here I did want to walk south to the southern end of Rayard. However, I think I'm going to wait for another day to do that. However, I did want to at least walk down here to a couple of these switches and take a look at them. This is looking on the scale track here, and there's another switch stand. I can see this also has a lock on it. This would be a Pittsburg and Shawmut lock, which unfortunately somebody has smashed this one as well. And I think there's another switch just up this way here, and from what I remember last time, that one also has a damaged lock as well. Right up here is the other switch, which I believe this would have gone into another switch to get onto the main at one time. But the switch stand here has been dislocated. I'm assuming someone probably did that. And while there is a lock here, this would be a P&S lock. Unfortunately, it too has been smashed. Damn vandals. But I would have liked to have had tried to salvage one of these locks just to have, because, you know, Pittsburg and Shawmut. But unfortunately, with them smashed, there's really no value to them now. I think I'm gonna end my trip here. Like I said, I would have liked to have continued going south, but I just don't feel like walking down there today. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn around, head back to the scale here. And now that I'm back at the scale where I started, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. Been quite an adventure walking to the northern end of Rayard, saw quite a few interesting things along the way. And I'll probably go ahead and come back at some point and do a video walking to the south end, but you know, that's for another day. But that all said, I'm going to end it here. You want to leave a comment, feel free to do so. Also, be sure to check out my other pages. I've got links in the description. And I will also leave a link to my full playlist of Pittsburg and Shawmut videos that I've shot on the channel. So you can feel free to check those out if you like. But anyways, thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys real soon.